It's just gone 9 o'clock Central Africa time. Welcome to Media Monitor, the show that analyzes your news media, both here at home and abroad. Coming to you from the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. I'm Peter Ndora. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, let's take a look at what you can look forward to on the program this hour. We'll be asking what's the future for South African media. This after it was revealed that the Sunday Times published some inaccurate stories on the so-called SARS rogue unit, Zimbabwe renditions and the Cato Manor death squads as they were described. We also look at some of the untold stories of children in South Africa. According to South African police stats, 64 children are sexually assaulted every day. Child abductions are on the increase, with only 1% of child trafficking victims ever being found. Alright, so we'll be taking a look at those stories a little bit later on, but before we delve into our discussions, let's first take a look at the Sunday newspaper headlines. This is what you're waking up to. The Sunday Times this morning is leading with, it continues I'm afraid, the VBS scandal. The ANC scored 2 million rand donation from the bosses of the VBS Mutual Bank, who sought political cover as they helped themselves to the funds of our municipalities. The City Press, well, that's leading with a story on how SA Express is losing, get this, 1 million rand a day paying leases on aircraft that lie idle in hangars because they're too unsafe to fly. This comes just in the same week as Finance Minister Tito Mboweni announced a 1.2 billion rand bailout for the ailing state-owned entity. The Sunday Independent is running with a story on how the net is closing in for the controversial Gupta brothers. The extradition treaty between South Africa and the United Arab Emirates tabled in Parliament for approval as a matter of urgency yesterday by Justice and Correctional Services Minister Michael Masuta may force the three brothers, Atul, Ajay and Tony, to flee Dubai, where they've been holed up for months. The Sunday Tribune, that's leading with a story about a gang believed to have carried out a reign of terror at retail stores in Durban, also stands accused of extorting money. The men police believe were behind the attacks have been arrested and are in the process of applying for bail in the Verulam Magistrates Court. The Weekend Argus, well, that's leading with a story on how, despite infinite preparation, firefighter and disaster management departments anticipate a tough fire season and more deadly infernos. The publication further details how in the past 10 days, 4 people have died and more than 3,600 left homeless after 810 homes were gutted in separate fires across the province. Crossing our border into Eswatini, the Sunday Observer there is running with a story about how His Majesty King Mswati III has appointed MTN CEO Ambrose Dlamini as the new Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Eswatini. According to the publication, this was revealed yesterday during the 3rd day of the People's Parliament. Now, the front page of Nigeria's Daily, the Daily Trust is saying, is leading with a story on how 57 Chibok schoolgirls being held by Boko Haram have been sighted in 2 villages in Cameroon. Parents of the abducted girls told the publication yesterday. According to the publication, the girls were seen by other female captives who at different times were kept by the insurgents in 2 villages in Cameroon, which is a neighboring country, of course, to Nigeria. Alright, so that's your headlines of newspapers, and we'll take a look at some of the reporting in those papers a little bit later on. But first, the revelations of the inaccurate news published in South Africa's Sunday Times sent shockwaves through the country's media. The breach in ethics has resulted in the credibility not only of the publication itself being tainted, but South African media in general being looked at with less trust. The University of Cape Town's Professor Herman Wasserman says that South African journalism again faces a crisis of conscience. This scandal has forced the media to do some introspection. And the question is that we're asking is, what's the future for SA media?
The vigilance that one would have expected of editors to make sure that their newspapers are not used in the factional wars within political parties and in the private sector. The Sunday Times, well, was just a victim. Was just a victim of that. Now, if at all, your editors, news editors, and editors fail to have those safeguards that make sure that journalists are not used to pursue personal agendas, then that's what I think should be a shot across the bows that the media has now got to say, are we doing things the correct way? What other measures can we put in place to make sure that we put South Africa first than sectional interests?
All right, so that's a veteran journalist, a long-time watcher and participator in journalism, Tami Mazwai, speaking to us during the course of the week. Now, to discuss this plight of the Fourth Estate in discussion is Professor Ilva Rodney-Gumede from the Department of Journalism, Film and Television in the School of Communications at the University of Johannesburg. Thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you, Peter.
So, this Sunday Times story, I think everyone knows the details or the bulk of it, but I guess what it does raise is, what is the state in terms of trust of South African media as a result of this and other inaccuracies that other publications may carry from time to time? Have we moved from mistakes and errors to carelessness, negligence, and actual participation in what's being termed fake news?
I mean, I think that's it's a good question, and I think what's happened here is that, in a sense, when we've been criticized a lot in later years, and there's been some political pressures on the media as well. And I think that our defense, as you say, Peter, has always been that, no, these are, mistakes, isolated mistakes, they do happen, we need to take greater care, we need to reinforce ethics, and a colleague of mine down at Rhodes, Anthea Garman, also a journalism professor, called it, reinforcing an ethos rather than just looking at ethics maybe specifically. And I think that's important. But what's happened here is actually that this has been a long-term process. So whether it's been a gradual erosion from, as you say, the isolated mistakes into something that's much bigger, and I would like to label it media capture, if you wish. And I think that it goes beyond also Sunday Times. But if we stay with the Sunday Times, what we know is that this has been going on for many, many years. And I think that's what makes it so dangerous. So this idea of building up and sources with agendas that have then groomed the journalists. Normally we grow our sources, and we make sure that we have good sources that we might have a relationship over years. But here, actually, the sources have had the upper hand. We haven't then had journalists who have known how to manage them, haven't looked carefully at the hidden agendas, and that's the problem.
What's gone wrong? Is it that, as Dr. Tami Mazwai was saying, is that the checks and balances that used to be there perhaps are not working, or are they being just flouted purposefully? Because one would think, I write a story, I've got a sub-editor, an editor, and even a managing editor, especially if it's a huge story, who are going to go through this and ask the questions, the critical questions. Whilst you as a reporter will not tell the public who your sources are, you will tell your editor. Do you know what I mean? One would have thought. So what is happening? Is it that there's a breakdown in the checks and balances, or is there something more sinister going on?
I think there might be, I think there's a breakdown in the checks and balances. I think that, you know, we haven't invested enough in training, mentorship within the news media. We've seen a trend towards a juniorization and quite fast turnovers, and these are global trends. This is not just the South African news media, we need to be clear on that. But we have seen it, and I think in our context, in a complex society such as we are in many ways, you know, still a society in some transition, the idea of checking your sources and having those checks and balances in use are really, really crucial and critical. And that goes back to the second part of your question, that actually having come out of a history where we know that there's been, you know, corruption of the news media, spies in the newsroom, and really strong contested political agenda, this then once again becomes even more crucial.
So how does the newspaper industry, the television media, news sources that are deemed the media, start to regain trust? Because we've all been affected one way or another. Us as a public broadcaster, we've gone through our own trust issues. How do we gain the public's trust again when there are so many more news sources of news on social media?
Well, someone said the other day, shouldn't we just, you know, go rolling out, you know, making more hard-hitting stories, more investigative stories? Okay, so we need to continue that. But I think there's a time also to pause a little bit and rethink some of the things that we have done and what we're doing. I think that for the Sunday Times, for example, but it's not only, and I don't, you know, I do think this goes beyond the Sunday Times, that, you know, to regain the public's trust, I think that openness, accountability is going to be absolutely crucial. I think there are a lot of stories that we need to do on what went wrong, and to actually, you know, look at practices, processes, and actually tell our readers and our audience that this is how we think about journalism, this is the stories that we want to do, this is how we should do it, and these are the spaces where we didn't do a good job, and this is what went wrong. And that kind of accountability is part of a mandate that we have to also actually open up to our audiences and teach them the practices. And, you know, it's all about media literacy. And when we, you know, when we work with the public and, you know, educate and inform the public of what journalism is and this is how it's done, then we do a good job as well.
One other area that, you know, if you sort of gauge by reaction on social media is there's this accusation of bias and lack of impartiality. And I just wonder, is it the way that we're telling the stories that we're starting to cross the line into opinion a bit more with our pieces? Is that something that you're noticing? Why is this perception that, you know, we're supporting white monopoly capital, or we're supporting this particular party? Where is that coming from, do you think? I
mean, I think it goes back once again to a history of contested politics, where agendas had to play themselves out, and there were, you know, there were real pressures on the news media, and I mean, you know, during the days of apartheid, of course, we had a media that was largely co-opted by the Nationalist Party and the ideology of the then regime of apartheid, and that has changed, you know, going into the post-1994 era, where we then also seen ideas of corruption by the ANC and supporting certain fractions of the news media, for example. But I think that the baseline is, and I keep saying this over and over, is that we don't have a politically differentiated news media. Equally, we don't have that contested politics anymore, and it's sort of become a one-party state in some ways. We do have, you know, opposition parties. We are a multi-party democracy, but we have a very dominant ruling party, and that's, you know, and that's reflected, I think, in the news media as well. So when our readers pick up the Sunday Times or the Sunday Independent, there's no talking to a particular politics or a particular ideology. And that makes it difficult for the readers also to follow a particular narrative. So when we're not open and transparent about where we stand as the news media, I don't think we should necessarily support different political parties, but there might be ideologies that are more left of center and or more to the, you know. So that's important.
Do you think we're being influenced as mainstream media by social media? Because there are a lot of people now who are influencers, and they are not journalists, they peddle opinions, and that then gets compared to what we're doing, and we are then sometimes perhaps perceived to not being truthful, not being taking a certain line. And I just wonder, 'cause sometimes also media follows social media, as opposed to saying, look, this is what we're here to do, this is our agenda, this is how we should be reporting. We end up retweeting, as it were, inverted commas.
I think that's true, Peter, and that's quite sad that we've been taken in by the social media sphere to that extent. And that's something that we need to guard ourselves against. There's nothing wrong in engaging on social media or taking, leads from social media. I mean, the story that broke over the weekend was the shootings at the synagogue in Philadelphia, for example, in the States, that came out very, very quickly on Twitter for social media, and before any of the mainstream news media outlets could pick up on it even. So that's, one example, but that doesn't mean that we don't guard ourselves against taking in by stories that are either fake news or have strong political agendas or other, maybe even just commercial agendas. So we need to really, go back, as you say, to the checks and balances, and I think that's a baseline of reporting and
so
trust.
might a inquiry into the state of media be a good thing to cleanse the system, or do you think that's a bit overkill?
You know what? I don't think it's an overkill. I think it's. I mean, we had media hearings, during the during the TRC process as well in South Africa, which I think didn't go far enough to actually look at it, to be forward-looking, to actually make recommendations of what kind of new media system and what kind of new media framework do we want. That's one important thing. To do it now, we could do it. I think that we probably need some kind of engagement with the Press Council. We need an engagement with the South African National Editors Forum, other media organizations, SACOM, the South African Communication Association, all of these organizations, and a lot of civil society organizations, the media advocacy group, the SOS campaign, the Right to Know campaign. If we can get together, then we can probably do a good job and engage the different media houses and work together with journalists.
All right, Ilva, I know this is a conversation we're going to continue to have for some time, but thanks for sharing your thoughts with us here. We're going to chat to you again a little bit later on in the program, because we're going to take a quick break now, but just to let you know that up ahead we'll be taking a look at how media reports on stories involving children are being reported or underreported.
They've wasted our time, they've made our members to go on strike, they've made the public to suffer for nothing.
Andikwazi ukutya i-treatment ngendlela ngenxa into yoba imali ayikho. Ndifumene i-600 xa ndiphinda futhi ndidrowa ayiphumi ayikho kwakwi-account.
What we are experiencing now is due to the number of people accessing the system at the same time. So if they can just be patient for 3 to 4 days.
All of us there in the NEC have our smallanyana skeletons, and we don't want to take out all skeletons out, because they will be, or hell will break loose.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, this year, the media published shocking accounts of children devastated by rape and abuse, and heartbreaking stories of child murders. We take a look at some of these stories, and when one considers the numbers, children are sadly largely unrepresented in the media. Now, to unpack this a little bit more, I'm joined by Lista Namumba Rikotso, who's a Media Monitoring Africa project coordinator for a project called Make Abuse Disappear Online, accountability tool. Thanks very much for joining us on the program, Lista.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we know the statistics. The police tell us what they see and what they're observing. Is this something that you're seeing is being reported in the same proportions in our media or not?
Well, yes, and then sadly you find situations where they report such cases, but then the representation of children is what we usually worried about. So here I'm talking about roles that they children take on in the news stories about rape, as well as the violation of their rights, for instance, their rights to privacy and dignity, and especially where you find their witnesses at criminal proceedings, then they're identified, which is something that Media Monitoring Africa does not advise us against. So
all right, so let's work with some examples. I mean, the Dross case was quite shocking to most people. There was an obsession about the identity of the person, was there racial overtones and so on and so forth. And yes, we shouldn't identify the child, but do you think that the child's story was told and what happens to children in those kind of circumstances? Or did the media take the sensationalist route about this man who was caught with his pants down?
The child's story was not told at all. The media concentrated on the race of the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, as well as the to identify and to not identify, or mostly to identify. And sadly, that took away the spotlight on the issue, which was a child had been sexually abused, and. Well, I do not want to say we usually see this where the perpetrator is the story on the perpetrator takes away from the focus on the issue, which is abuse. But then it's so sad that in the Dross case we saw more focus on the alleged perpetrator and not on the child. And then this is just one child on that day. I heard you earlier talk about or allude to the fact that 64 children in a day are sexually abused, according to the stats, the recent stats. So when you have a situation like the Dross case, where the focus is on the perpetrator and the race, and it's taken away from the focus of the child, it's very sad, because there's so much that has to be told, and there's so much, the story of the child, the abuse has to be told. It's the only way to get it out there.
So what should the media be reporting and telling and saying? We can't run 64 stories every single day. It's just not physically possible. So how do we tell the story?
Well, then if you're going to tell the story, focus on the child, focus on the sexual abuse, focus on the abuse, any other abuse. Do not focus on the perpetrator, like what happened with the Dross, which is very sad. So also tell it in such a way that it gets to the right people, also that it gets the attention of policymakers, because something has to be done about. Isn't that why the media tells stories, to get the attention of the right people, policymakers, for instance. So tell it in such a way that it does not take away the focus on the on the situation, on the issue, which is abuse, and then tell it also in a way that does not violate the child's right and that does not compromise the case, as with the Dross case. Yeah.
So another case that's taking place right now is the Pastor Timothy Omotoso rape trial. And so it's alleged that Cheryl Zondi was raped when she was still a minor, and then later on when she was an adult. So she's there on the stand and she's telling a story, and the defense is bringing up pictures, and we see this man sitting in a lounge in a room with young girls and young children. And I just wonder, from your point of view and watching this, did we pick up on the right things in the storytelling of this case? What should have come through much more in your view?
Well, the Omotoso case has been reported well, especially that witness, Sharazondi in this case, consented to being identified. So it would have been a different situation if this witness was still a child.
Yeah.
The abuse took place with the child and they're still a child and they're, you know, a witness at the criminal proceeding. It would have been a child with regards to consent. Then here Media Monitoring Africa would advise that the journalist gauges whether it is in the best interest of the child to be identified, regardless of whether they've consented. And also we call for informed consent. So it's a different case because Shero is an adult, even if the abuse took place when she was a child. The fact that she's consented and she's an adult is good.
All right. So, you know, what I'm curious about a little bit is the defense attorney kept on asking her, but you knew this was going to happen to you. You went back later on. Do you think we tell the story enough about some of what she talked about, where she said he had a hold on me? Now, this is something that if you haven't experienced it, you can't quite process and understand what does that mean. And I'm not sure that we told that story in the media. Is that something we need to explain? Is this a phenomena that is genuinely happens, that someone gets a hold on someone psychologically and that they feel powerless to escape?
We don't see a lot of stories on sexual grooming. So usually the stories that we read about or see in the media are just reporting on the actual incident and not prior to what led to you know, the abuse. So in this case, she was sexually abused, sexually groomed, and we didn't pick that up from the we just the focus was on the trial and the fact that this man was a Nigerian pastor, not necessarily that it was sexual grooming. So we don't pick that up.
So what is grooming? Help us with that.
Well, let me not speak on that.
Yes.
I can find out and get back to you on that. Yeah, but what I can say is that it's not a topic that we see mostly in the media.
So one of the big concerns you have, and I think you sort of touched on it at the beginning, is protecting identity, and that can actually be indirectly if you name the perpetrator or name an area, a location, and things like that. Exactly. Is that something that you see often happening with the media? Yes.
So when I talk about identity being revealed, I'm talking both directly and indirectly. And often we see the indirect identification of children where they give, like you say, the identity of the parents or the perpetrator if the perpetrator is related to them. And this is where I think media, during our engagements with the media, they come back to us and say, we did not interview the child. We did not identify the child, rather, sorry. We identified the mother, or we identified the grandmother. But then if you give details of the where they stay, the identity of the parents or the perpetrator if they are related to them, or just any information that might lead to the identification, you are identifying the child indirectly, and we do not advise, we advise against that.
So what are your thoughts about the crime is committed when you were a minor, but you're now an adult? Should the person be identified once they've become an adult, or because it happened when she was a child, it should stay protected?
It should stay protected, and we're actually fighting to get that to win, to get the protection extended from when they turn 18. Hopefully we can win that, because we feel that we don't see a reason why the identity should be revealed now that you've turned 18. Despite you committed the crime, or the crime was committed when you were a child, why should it change now that you're 18? The protection should extend, and we're actually fighting for that legally.
Right. So there's some interesting reactions to some of the issues that we're talking about. Like in this one where it says, during Child Protection Week in 2018, the #IAM campaign aimed to name the child victims of violence across the country and tell their stories. But as the shocking accounts of some of the country's child murder victims and countless others whose lives were devastated by rape and abuse filled the media, it became clear that there was a group of children largely unrepresented by these narratives. So there are children being left out, but how do we include them? Because sometimes there are cases like the Dross case that suddenly becomes a center of attention, and yet there's 63 other children that day that are not represented.
I want to say take an interest in reporting on children's issues. If there's a story that is being sensationalized or is at the center, ask yourself, what about the other 63 children? How can I make sure that I fit them all in this report that I'm writing? So it's mostly interest, and then also from the engagements, journalists do not. I don't want to say the word are scared of ethical considerations that they have to make when reporting on children, but then it's all about interest.
Yeah. All right, so we've run out of time, but in 20 seconds, speaking to all journalists and people who perhaps are not journalists but are on social media and so on, what's your biggest concern that people should be mindful of?
Do not identify children who are involved in stories that are on crime. And also, if it's positive stories, how about you get them to speak? Let the voices of children be heard when in their best interest.
All right. Mr. Namumba Rikotso, thanks very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this very important issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll continue to bring you more on Media Monitor after this break, and soon we'll be unpacking the burning story of community radio station Kumkani FM in the Eastern Cape. Stay tuned for more on this topic when Media Monitor returns.
Clientele funeral plans.
It's your final gift of love.
I chose the clientele funeral plan because it's affordable and suits my budget.
I chose clientele because they are an original. They've been around for a long time, and I know with them my family are in good hands.
I'm a farmer and I'm a businessman, and I know a good deal when I see one. Clientele is a good deal.
Clientele is the name I trust.
SMS plan to 31043 and we'll call you back.
Need to know more about the markets? This is where it all starts. At the SABC's headquarters in Auckland Park in Johannesburg, South Africa. We analyze, report, crunch the numbers, call in the experts, package the news, and bring you critical global market updates from the JSE.
The continent's leaders in liquid market movement and the fastest growing secondary listings made right here.
Small businesses, the backbone of the economy, with South Africa's very high unemployment rate, it said that 90% of new jobs could come from this sector.
Every weekday afternoon on DSTV channel 404.
The real good thing about this investment summit is that a number of companies are going to be making pronouncements on the investments that they are going to be making in our economy.
The International Investment Summit, debating ways and means to rebuild the country's economy at the Sandton Convention Center on Friday.
For comprehensive coverage of the summit, watch SABC News, listen to SABC Radio, or follow at SABC News online.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Community media in South Africa came into being with the first licenses being issued in 1994, and this was to fulfill a mandate of providing a media that reflects the needs and aspirations of all South Africans. The sector now has over 250 radio stations and over 10 TV channels, but it's still facing a number of challenges, such as the high broadcast transmission fees, unfair competition by mainstream media, and non-compliance of good corporate governance, to name just a few. Despite these challenges, though, community radio station Kumkani FM in the Eastern Cape began broadcasting with a mission to establish and develop the local entertainment industry by involving the youth. Well, let's now talk to Kumkani FM, just outside East London. That's where they operate from. And its station manager, Alime Jabula, joins me now from our Port Elizabeth studios to tell us a little bit more about some of the challenges that community media faces. Alime, thanks very much for joining us, and welcome to the program. Thank you for being part of Media Monitor.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, tell us a little bit about your station, where you're operating from, and who your audiences are mainly.
Okay, Kumkani FM is based in East London in a location called Scenery Park. We are targeting youth, to be specific, from the age of 13 to 35, but also not leaving behind the elderly, because they're the one who have a buying power. So to attract investors, we have to accommodate them as well.
All right, so take us through some of the challenges that you face as a community radio station, just to stay on air and to be able to serve this important community that you're trying to help.
Okay, basically, it's on the governance. It took us a while to be compliant on the CSD report, but however, we are now compliant, meaning we can now do business with government, we can trade with our government. The issues of resources, because we're not generating enough revenue, therefore you'll find that even if we did have that particular item, when it has to go for repairs, we can't afford to take it there. But another thing is that just the upgrading of the studios, because I know very soon our studios will lose its value. So the main challenge is revenue, besides just human resource and so on. But the main challenge, I think, for my station, it is to generate revenue. And to my surprise, we are operating close to the East London CBD.
So tell us a bit about this compliance issue, because on the one hand, you're supposed to be an NPO, non-profit organization, but on the other, you have to make money to survive. And the receiver of revenue looks at you with different eyes, doesn't it?
Yes. With regards to being an NPO, you are correct in the revenue part. However, because of the fact that you are non-compliant, you can't take business from your local government departments, because the supply chain system has to verify if you are compliant on the National Treasurer's database. So now what we make as the station, it purely comes from the private sector, those small businesses that you have to charge them reasonably, because you don't intend to make profit, but you need to be able to pay the expenses of your you need to pay your operations, so to speak.
So you're expecting a bit more support from local government and national government, I guess, because you do have an audience, an important one. Let's talk about them. If you went on air, what would they be missing out on? What is it? What service that's important to them that do you provide?
Okay, they will miss out on a whole lot from young child, 13 upwards. We have varieties of programs that even the youth broadcast, even our current affairs are broadcasted by youth. We also have our breakfast show that is so vibrant and exciting, including our afternoon drive. Then we have a show that is specifically meant to accommodate teenagers, to be exact, because we know the general view that the moment you reach a teenage stage, you become problematic at home. But we do have a program that speaks to you, that guides you as to how you are supposed to behave in this stage of your life moving forward.
And what are the biggest issues that the community is phoning in about, that they're worried about, that they're concerned about, that keeps coming up time and time again?
The common one is the housing. The RDP houses is the most common one. I remember there's a story that we are currently continuing to do, and it concerns the housing, the RTP housing. And with regards to the housing, I think late 2017 and early.
All right, okay. It looks like we've lost the link there. We're going to try and get back to her because I do want to get a bit more from her about this RDP housing and how community radio stations and television channels can be a champion and advocate for the people in a way that national media can't, I guess. So we'll try and get Halima back because I think she really has an important voice that she can share with us. As I said, there's I think upwards of 256 community radio stations in the country now, and more people are tuning into community media, and so it's an important part of the media landscape and one that should be taken seriously. We're going to take a quick break at the moment, and then we'll come back. We'll try and get back to Port Elizabeth, but also look at your newspapers a bit more closely.
Special assignment. Crime keeps the society in terror and pain. Why so?
If someone phones me, tells me, okay, look here, he needs a server, and I get you all driving, I'll take it.
What pushes normal people to be so hard, heartless, and brutally kill one another?
The other side of it could be more for their own psychological need. It might be part of a sexual fantasy that they have. It could be about power and control.
After proper investigation is followed, the perpetrator gets arrested.
It's quite a massive process. And ultimately, they have killers, so I think justice is served.
Emotional scars remain.
We would pay any price to get him back, and the sad reality is that it's gone.
Special assignment. We unravel the truth every Sunday at 21:30.
We are in the fourth industrial revolution.
Things aren't the same anymore.
Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders, we use social media.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
Welcome back. As we said just before the break, we're going to start taking a look at what's happening in the newspapers and how the media generally covers some of the big stories. But before that, let's take a look at the latest developments in that worrying story, of course, of the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi's case. Now, the journalist was killed in a Saudi consulate in Istanbul earlier this month.
The fiancé of slain Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. She says she's refused an invitation to meet U.S. President Donald Trump because she believes it would amount to a PR stunt. Hatice Cengiz cried multiple times in her first television interview since the killing. The Turkish woman says she doesn't believe the White House is being sincere in its efforts to bring the perpetrators to justice.
His statements contradicted each other over a very short time period. I perceived it as an attempt to win public sympathy.
Cengiz was one of the last people to see Khashoggi alive before he entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, never to emerge. Security cameras captured their last moments. Saudi Arabia claims the critic was murdered in a rogue operation. The U.S. and Turkey have a tumultuous relationship, though. They back opposing factions in Syria's civil war, and President Trump has placed sanctions on the NATO ally that have helped drive its currency into crisis mode. Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor will visit Istanbul on Sunday. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan is demanding that Saudi reveal the location of Khashoggi's body and who ordered the killing. Khashoggi had gone to the consulate to get marriage documentation.
He was seeing there an emotional and tearful fiancé of the Khashoggi, who has died. And I think what's shocking about that particular story really is that it happened in a consulate, and one just doesn't think that things like that could happen. But we'll see how the story further develops, whether people will be brought to book. Turkey is demanding that at least 18 people be brought to trial in Turkey, but we'll see. And in particular, one person who's closer to the Crown Prince there. All right, so let's take a look at the media stories now. And just 2 weeks into the job, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni delivered his medium-term budget policy statement this week in Parliament. Mboweni delivered a hard message of slowing revenue in a low-growth economy with a stubbornly high unemployment rate. My guests to look at some of these issues and what else is in the newspapers, Ilva Rodney Gumede, and we're also joined by Lister Namumba Rikhotso. Thanks very much for joining us, ladies. All right, so what I want to do, actually, let's take a look at how the newspapers did cover that story of the medium-term budget statement. And this is how some of their headlines played out. Let's take a look. So, goeie news, the beeld. My Afrikaans is nie lekker nie. But there you have it. In the business day, of course, also Mboweni Kanda weakens the Rand. So the Rand took a bit of a knock as a result of his honesty. Critics lash out at Mboweni. So not everybody was happy or excited with some of the things that he said, particularly the e-tolls, I can tell you that for sure. The Cape Town's budget paints a grim picture. Some hard truths he certainly was sharing with people. And the Daily Dispatch says, where's the cash, Tito? So that was just a look at some of the newspaper headlines looking at this story. And Elva, I just wonder, again, I'm a citizen, and I think a lot of people didn't understand what a budget policy statement actually is, and they were expecting the kind of things that you would get at the proper budget. Is it our fault as the media that we don't properly explain these and break it down?
Well, if it's anyone's fault, I'm not so sure. But I think what's important to remember here, and I think what I would have liked to see is exactly that. Explain what it means, what it is. I think also we have a lot of confusing coverage of economics and financial news in particular. Often not easy stories, but they need to be broken down and contextualized in such a way that all readers can understand and that we get a full and better picture. Then I think the third part of it is that we've become very, very good in late years to recycle politicians and, built as, good news, hoy news, hopefully good news. But I think that maybe we should also delve a little bit deeper into how, we have a new finance minister, also what is the composition of the ministry, and a little bit more of those stories as well to make it easier for us to follow and actually assess what is the good news here.
All right, so that's the budget statement. Lister, you've been looking at the papers. As a child activist, is there something else that grabbed your attention in there?
So just to make comment on the budget, the midterm budget statement, I didn't see anything about children, so the media didn't report anything. It would have been nice to pick out something from the budget that was related to children. But something that caught my attention from today's papers, the first one was in Sunday Independent. So this is on page 5. There's a story about virginity testing. And I'm happy to comment on how the child was portrayed and the fact that the child was accessed. So this is on page 4. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. Yes. So that's the story. So she's basically commenting on virginity testing and alluding to the fact that children should be given a chance to choose whether to undergo it or not, and that boys should also be go through the
boys virgin testing.
Yes.
Test them. That's interesting.
Yes.
So it is a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're caught between culture and you're caught between modernity. How do you manage this, and so that children don't suffer, because they can be ostracized as well, can't they?
Yes, yes. Let me not comment on the content, what the issue is, but just on the fact that Sunday Independent took an opportunity to access this child, so we rarely see that. So usually what we see is such a story on virginity testing, and then they will not access any child. And we believe that if it's in the best interest of children to be accessed, let them be accessed. And the way this child is portrayed, of course, she's she might what she is saying might not, you know, be okay with some people, but then the fact that she's accessed and portrayed, is commendable.
Do you know what? We always run out of time, and I don't know how we can extend time, but it's always a pleasure having great guests. Elva, always lovely talking to you. Lissa, thanks so much for coming through. And also to Alima, who we'd hoped we'd chat to a bit more. We've lost the line there. Thanks so much. You're there in Port Elizabeth. Thanks you all at home for watching Media Monitor. Make it a date to do it again at the same time next week, where we take a look at, again, the things of the media in greater light. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.